The Mysterious Death of Beautiful Nell Cropsey. There is a jingle of a song that's popular with schoolboys, and others, about one of our eastern North Carolina rivers. It says something about how, way down on the Pasquotank, the bullfrogs jump from bank to bank. Well, the bullfrogs do nothing of the kind, of course. Bullfrogs along the banks of the Pasquotank would need rocket attachments on their jumping equipment to get even partway across the Pasquotank in a jump. The big, sprawling, flat, sluggish stream spreads out in the Elizabeth City vicinity to make a picturesque world of water, cypress trees, and flat, low country. It's a great boating place, a fine fishing ground, and, for the purposes of giving this particular story a backdrop, a beautiful setting for romantic lovers who thrive best on combinations of lapping water, full moon, and overhanging trees. Into this sort of world, the Cropsey family moved in 1898. They came from New York State, and the family consisted of parents and several young daughters. W.H. Cropsey, head of the house, was a buyer of potatoes and grain for a New York commission merchant, and the family had been living in Brooklyn. The Cropseys liked the Pasquotank River country, and that section liked them. In spite of being a Yankee and having to face some little prejudice on that score, Mr. Cropsey succeeded at once, both financially and socially, in what was then a little coastal town. He established his family in a fine home 200 feet from the bank of the Pasquotank River in the best residential section of the community of that day. This home was often the scene of gay parties. All of the daughters were pretty, and two were of marriageable age when the family arrived in Elizabeth City. These were Ollie, 18, and Nellie, a year and a half younger, and you may be sure that the young blades of the community found ways and means of being presented to the Mrs. Cropsey. Reports from the day indicate that Nellie was exquisitely beautiful indeed, a young woman of the kind that artists dream of finding and lovers always see through mist-clouded eyes. Through the turbulent times that came to the Cropseys, one adjective became so affixed to Nellie's name and so much a part of her as a young lady that she was always referred to as Beautiful Nell Cropsey. That the adjective was not mere legend, but was well-deserved, may be seen in a life-size head-and-shoulder photograph of beautiful Nell that is still in existence. It is done in color and shows, as well as a photograph can, dark blue eyes glowing with mischief and intelligence, chestnut brown hair, finely shaped mouth, a delicately pointed nose, and a high forehead that lends dignity to the face of the young woman. Back at the turn of the present century, one of the beautiful Nell Cropsey's suitors was James Wilcox, 25 years of age, and the son of Thomas P. Wilcox, a former sheriff of Pasquotank County. He became interested in beautiful Nell soon after the family came south to Elizabeth City, and he gave her his attention for some 3 years. During this time, he was working as a lumber mill hand and taking a correspondence school law course. On Wednesday night, November 20th, 1901, Jim Wilcox was calling on beautiful Nell Cropsey, as was his custom. But their love affair was not going smoothly. Nellie had apparently been thinking of their 3-year courtship, which had as yet brought no marriage proposal. Not being willing to wait forever, she had thought that by igniting a spark of jealousy, by showing her suitor that she was attractive to other men, she could prompt a certain question. So Nellie had been engaging in mild flirtations, and Jim had been sulking. Then there was a quarrel, which ended with Nellie's tears and Jim's apologies. Because of this turn of affairs, members of the family said Jim Wilcox was silent and morose on that particular night in November. He did not, in fact, speak for a good part of the evening. Ollie Cropsey, Nellie's sister, was there that evening, as was the girl's cousin, Carrie Cropsey from New York, and Roy Crawford, an office clerk who had been paying considerable attention to Ollie. As the young people sat talking, the conversation turned to, of all things, suicide and its methods. "I'd rather drown myself," Jim Wilcox announced. "Oh, I wouldn't. I'd rather freeze to death," Nellie said gaily. Ollie said later that Jim, who wasn't talking much, kept watching the clock. Finally, at 11 p.m., he rose and said he had to go. According to Ollie's story, Jim held the front door open a crack as he went out and whispered back through the narrow opening to Nellie that he wanted to speak with her. Nellie looked questioning at Ollie, who later said she indicated with a nod that her sister should talk to Jim Wilcox. So Nell stepped out on the front porch of her home with her sweetheart. And in stepping across the threshold of her home and out into the chill night air of late fall, beautiful Nell Cropsey stepped, it seems, into another world, never to be seen alive again. This particular mystery has fascinated the people of North Carolina, particularly in East Coast country, for nearly half a century. Ollie Cropsey said later that her sister stepped out on the porch with Jim Wilcox. She heard a quick snap or thump, as if something had bumped suddenly into the door. In the later gathering together of loose ends of information, Caleb Parker reported that he drove by the Cropsey home in his buggy about 11 p.m. and that he saw Jim and Nell standing at the gate to the Cropsey yard in the moonlight. Jim had his arm around Nell, and her head was bowed, Caleb said. Meantime, inside the Cropsey home, Cousin Carrie went upstairs for the night. Then Sister Ollie's caller, Roy Crawford, took his leave. He said he saw no one out in front as he swung off the porch and down the street. When 11:45 came and Nell had not come back into the house, Ollie went to the front hall and found the door standing wide open to the night air. The screen door was pushed so far back that it had broken the spring. Ollie called her sister but received no reply. Puzzled, she closed the door and went upstairs. Ollie said she had decided that Nellie had perhaps already come in and gone to her room so silently as to not disturb the others. Ollie felt her sister's bed in the dark and found it empty. In connection with her description of a growing fear given later, Ollie recalled that a strange bright light from the moon came in at her bedroom window. The clock struck 12, she drowsed, but was quickly pulled back to consciousness by the whistle of a distant lumber mill. And then bedlam broke loose in the Cropsey backyard. The Cropsey dogs began to bark and the pigs to squeal. A neighbor shouted, "Cropsey! Cropsey! Someone's after your pigs! Get your gun!" Ollie jumped up and ran from her room into the hallway, calling to her father not to shoot. "Nell and Jim are outside somewhere." Mr. Cropsey pulled on his pants over his nightshirt, stuck his feet into a pair of shoes, and paddled down the stairs with his rifle in his hands. Pig theft, or his daughter and her beau wandering around the grounds. Either prospect irritated him. Ollie said that he grumbled, "What's that girl thinking of, out at this hour disturbing the dogs and the pigs?" But the father, ready to give the young people the peace of his mind, did not find Nell, Jim, or a thief. He returned to the house to see if Nell had gone to bed without her sister's knowledge. She was not to be found, and their uneasiness increased. The father, now thoroughly aroused, set out for the Wilcox home. Striding up to the Wilcox porch after a 10-minute walk through the night, Cropsey pounded on the door. The drowsy ex-sheriff answered his knocking, and Cropsey explained his mission and expressed his displeasure with young Wilcox. "Why, Jim's been home since midnight. He's fast asleep," protested the elder Wilcox. Jim was called in. In a few minutes he appeared in his nightshirt, apparently just awakened from a sound sleep. "Where's Nell?" Cropsey demanded. "Nellie?" Jim asked in surprise. "Why, home, isn't she? I left her on your front porch around 11:15. By this time anger had given way to fear, and the worried father hastened to the nearby home of Police Chief Henry Dawson to report the girl's disappearance. Dawson dressed and accompanied Cropsey back to his home. Together the two men searched the house and grounds. They looked all about the rustic summer house down at the river's edge and the boat landing. They searched the neighbors' yards, but there was no Nell. They went back to the Wilcox home to demand from Jim an exact account of the events of the evening. Jim gave his step-by-step version. He said he left his own home at 8 p.m. to take Nell Cropsey an umbrella that he had borrowed and return a picture of her that she had given him 2 years before. He said that he had decided to return the items and not see the young woman again. He had not planned to stay for the evening. But Ollie answered the door, and he had to go in and wait for Nell to come downstairs. The evening wore on, and it was 11 o'clock before he asked Nell to go to the front porch with him. There, he said, he gave her the picture and the umbrella and told her that he wasn't coming back again. "What did she say?" Chief Dawson demanded. "She began to cry," Jim said. "She leaned against a porch post with her head on her arm. I told her she'd better go in, but she wouldn't stop crying. After about 10 minutes, I told her I had to meet a man at Barnes' barroom before it closed, and had to leave. She stopped crying long enough to say, 'Well, go on then.' So I did go." Wilcox said that he was much agitated and wandered in the moonlight for a few minutes, maybe half an hour, and then went to Barnes' bar, had a glass of beer with Len Owens, and went home to bed. Chief Dawson checked and found the umbrella in the hall rack at the Cropsey home, but the picture was not to be found. He decided that he would detain Wilcox until the case was cleared up, and before the dawn of November 21st, the young man was behind bars at Pasquotank Jail, in charge of Deputy Sheriff Charles Reed. The next day brought no trace of the girl. Bloodhounds followed her trail from the porch to the rustic house and then to the boathouse, but there was no other sign that she had been to either place. The river was dragged over a wide area, and more than 100 houses were searched in the town and adjoining county, but Nell had vanished. Feeling ran high against Jim Wilcox, who was now formally charged with abduction. Then came silence, mystery, and suspense. Hours, days, weeks of it. And with it all, absolutely no trace of beautiful Nell Cropsey, who had stepped out of her front door and vanished. In that period, Jim Wilcox was, of course, questioned again and again. Evidence developed tending to show that although he left the Cropsey home at 11, he did not reach his own home until 1 o'clock the next morning. A witness also reported that Wilcox had a blackjack, which he had boastfully showed to an acquaintance. As news of the disappearance spread, the Cropsey family received notes from people all over the state, who reported that they had seen beautiful Nell, now known generally by that descriptive title, in this city and that city. Ollie recalled that Nell had told her of a terrible dream she had a few nights before her disappearance. A dream so horrible that it made Nell feel that something was going to happen to her. Remembrance of this dream brought no comfort to the distraught family. On December 24th, Mr. Cropsey received an anonymous letter postmarked Utica, New York. The writer said he had information concerning the events of the night of November 20th. He said Jim Wilcox left Nellie Cropsey crying on the porch. She was there for some time. Where she was when Roy Crawford departed, the writer didn't say. Then the Cropsey dogs barked. Nellie went from the porch to the yard to investigate the cause of the commotion. She found an Elizabeth City man stealing a pig. She recognized him and threatened to tell her father. Thereupon, the letter continued, the man stunned Nell with a stick, carried her body to the river, dumped it into a boat, and rowed away with her, unconscious or dead. The writer of the letter predicted that the body of beautiful Nell would be found at a given spot. He marked that spot on an appended diagram. Cropsey read the letter and noted its contents. If he turned it over to the police, no official notice was taken of it. And yet, just 5 days later, Nellie's body was found near the spot marked on the mysterious chart, 150 yards downstream from the Cropsey boathouse. Every night, the heartbroken mother had been going down to the banks of the Pasquotank, which takes on a bay-like shape near the Cropsey home, there to look for her daughter, to search through the night when sleep would not come to her. This had gone on for days without a whisper of news of beautiful Nell, days when the family hoped against hope that she was still alive. And then on one of her lonely night vigils, Mrs. Cropsey saw something white floating on the water. At her direction and insistence, a fisherman rowed out and found the body of beautiful Nell Cropsey. A lynching party was quickly formed, but James Wilcox was saved from the wrath of this mob by the Cropseys themselves, according to the word of the county sheriff at the time. The mob came to the jail where Wilcox had been lodged, bringing a rope and screaming that they would hang him from the nearest tree. Mr. Cropsey, the father, backed by Mrs. Cropsey, refused to have anything to do with the mob, and the tremendous excitement gripped Elizabeth City. Loud and persistent threats of lynching continued. Finally, Sheriff Grandy wired Governor Charles B. Aycock with the assistance of, quote, Naval Reserves, a part of the State Guard. The reserve group was ordered to the jail, and with this arrival of the military, the crowds of angered citizens ceased to gather. Some stray bits of evidence, all entirely circumstantial, began to point a rather wavering finger at Jim Wilcox. In addition to the unexplained period of time on that night the beautiful Nell disappeared, the blackjack he carried, and the suggestive motive that he was about to be jilted by a pretty girl, it was recalled that on the Saturday before the disappearance of Nellie Cropsey, Jim Wilcox had tried to get her to go sailing with him on the Pasquotank. Both Nell and her sister Ollie were afraid of the venture, and the invitation was refused. And when Wilcox did get Cousin Carrie and another of the Cropsey sisters to go out with him on his boat, he didn't bring them back until 6 p.m., which was dark at that time of year. Everybody was uneasy until they finally put in an appearance. And just before he returned to the house with the girls, Wilcox suggested wrapping the sister in a blanket and bring her in as if she were dead, just to frighten the mother. The coroner, Irving Fearing, and 2 Elizabeth City physicians found that young Cropsey woman had come to her death, quote, by being stricken a blow on the left temple and by being drowned in the Pasquotank River. This rather curious statement excited argument among medical men for months to follow. But contrary to the usual condition after death by drowning, the coroner's report stated that no water was found in the lungs of the dead girl. The blow on the temple, the 2 physicians agreed, had been struck by a round, padded instrument, something like a blackjack. There were no other marks of violence. All this assortment of circumstances seemed to add up to enough evidence for the authorities to take Jim Wilcox to trial, faced with a charge of murder. As the trial finally got underway, 200 talesmen were called, and the selection of a jury was a long and tedious undertaking. When 12 men were finally seated in the jury box, Solicitor George W. Ward told them that he could show by motive and opportunity that Wilcox killed Nellie Cropsey, and that the young man was tired of the girl, but feared that if he threw her over after 3 years of courtship, she would provoke a public scandal. Anticipating the defense, the prosecutor scoffed at the idea that a, quote, healthy, happy girl would kill herself. As the trial unfolded, Ward sought to show through medical testimony that Nellie did not die of drowning, that she was dying or dead before being put into the river. Even the coroner, whose report originally said that she had drowned, ended by testifying that she had not. The prosecution based its case largely on the fact that Wilcox was the last man to see beautiful Nell Cropsey alive. In a prolonged and sensation-packed trial, he was convicted and sentenced to death. Eventually, a new trial was granted and was given to him in another county, where he was again convicted, this time for second-degree murder. A prison sentence followed. In neither trial did Wilcox take the stand in his own defense to deny the crime with his own lips. Wilcox served behind prison bars of the state prison until December 20th, 1920, when he was pardoned by Governor Thomas W. Bickett. Previously, Governor Locke Craig had refused twice to pardon the man. Governor Bickett refused to pardon once, before he finally granted favorable action. Neither of the governors could apparently understand why Wilcox had not taken the stand to deny his guilt and offer defense for himself. In setting Wilcox free from prison, Governor Bickett seems to have become convinced that Wilcox had not killed his sweetheart as charged. Roland F. Beasley, a veteran newspaper man of Monroe and Charlotte, believes that Governor Bickett discovered the true explanation of the death of Nell Cropsey. Editor Beasley once said, "I think that Jim Wilcox told Governor Bickett the truth about what happened that night in 1901, and that Governor Bickett believed him, and for that reason pardoned him." No one knows what Wilcox told Governor Bickett, and no one will ever know, for both men are now dead. Mr. Beasley said that Governor Bickett told him, some weeks before he pardoned Wilcox, that there was an explanation in the case compatible with Wilcox's innocence. The governor added that he was to be at prison camp in the mountains where Wilcox was confined, and planned to talk with the prisoner. "If he says what I think he probably will say, I expect to pardon him," Editor Beasley quoted Governor Bickett as saying. The conversation did take place between the governor and the prisoner. What was said has never been revealed, and has never been placed in any record. But Jim Wilcox went home. Editor Beasley happened to be on a train going to Elizabeth City on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1920, and Jim Wilcox was on the same train, going home from prison. Editor Beasley didn't know that Wilcox was on the train until it stopped at Elizabeth City, and Wilcox got off, dressed like a mountain climber with a squirrel tail in his hat band and 2 dogs on chains. He presented a picture quite different from that of the dapper young lover of 18 years before, on trial for his life. After his release from prison, he lived as a recluse. He felt as if everybody wanted to shun him. "People don't want me around," he once said. And then, after a score of years had passed, the story took a new turn. Jim Wilcox shot his own head off with a shotgun. At that time, when a new generation was reading the newspapers, it's just another suicide. But to those who had followed the case back in 1901, it was another startling chapter in the story of the strange death of beautiful Nell Cropsey.